your bird has one. I did a video a few years ago about emergencies and how to handle them. In that video, I briefly discussed blood feathers, what they were, and how to handle them if your bird breaks one. Now, there was a lot of confusion that came out of that with people not fully understanding what a blood feather was. I was noticing a lot of comments saying, oh, I hope my bird never gets one, and little things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, I hate to break it to you, but if you have a bird that has feathers on their body, they have had blood feathers, and they probably presently have blood feathers all over their body. In order for a bird to grow a feather, they have to have had a blood feather. That's just kind of how the anatomy works. Your bird is going to constantly have blood feathers on them, and that's not a problem. So I'm going to clarify what this means because there seems to be a lot of fear around it and a lot of kind of misunderstanding over what a blood feather actually is. So in order to do that, we're going to start out with how feathers actually grow. And we're not going to get too complicated with this, we're just going to use the absolute basics to help understand what a blood feather exactly is. So when it comes to how a feather actually develops, what's going to happen is the body is going to decide that a feather is getting a little too old, a little too damaged, and it's going to start pushing it out of its skin. And it's going to start to mold out this feather until it fully falls out and you're left with just an empty follicle where a feather can then grow. At this stage, the body's going to start rushing a lot of blood flow to that area because they're trying to get all the nutrients necessary to this one spot to help a feather grow. And what you're going to start to notice is that underneath your bird's skin, there might be a tiny little black spot or even a tiny little pokey pin starting to come out through their skin. When a feather's first developing, you'll barely even notice it, and it'll just be this tiny little bump on the skin that is where a hard keratin sheath is just starting to develop. As the stage progresses, you'll notice this tiny little pin-shaped sheath coming out through the skin and becoming a little bit longer each day. And one thing you'll primarily notice is that the sheath that comes through is typically pitch black or a very, very dark gray. And what that's going to show you is that there is a very high concentration of blood flow going up and down in this little keratin pin shape that is working very hard to grow a feather. At this point in time, this part of the bird is very fragile and it's very sensitive. If you go and you touch this area or you kind of flick it accidentally, your bird is going to squeak and they're going to try and peck you or bite you because that area is very, very sore. They've got a sharp, pokey, thick sheath coming through their skin with a very high concentration of blood flow. All the nerves over there are very irritated. It's very, very sore. So the bird isn't going to want to be touched there, and this feather as a whole is very, very delicate, which means it's going to break very easily if it were to get bashed on something or it were to accidentally get preened too hard. As this pin feather starts to develop, you will notice it's starting to change color. And what's going to happen is the very tip of this feather is going to start turning a matte white. And as you go closer and closer to the base of the feather towards the skin, it's going to go to like a gray towards a black, and it's going to be very glossy where there's still a lot of blood flow. These feathers are still called pin feathers because it has that classical pin shape with a tapered end. What this stage of a pin feather is showing you is how much of the feather is done actually growing. The areas that are still very dark and black have a lot of blood flow, they're still working on growing that feather. The area that is white and matte can actually start flaking off at this point and exposing a healthy, new, fully developed feather tip. When that happens and the tip flakes off, that's when we just start calling it a generic blood feather. Throughout this entire process of development, there has been blood flow in this sheath. It's just because the tip has come off, that it's not a pin shape anymore, that we just start calling them generic blood feathers, even though they have all had blood in them throughout this entire process. It's just because it doesn't have that tapered tip anymore because it is flaked off to expose the feather. As the feather continues to grow, more and more of that sheath is going to turn white, and it's going to become very easy for that little keratin shell to flake off until it fully exposes a very healthy, fully produced feather. And that's just how feathers develop. That's the very basics of it. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that's just the very basics of how a feather is developed and the sort of stages it goes through. Now, as you can imagine, having a very thick pin-shaped object piercing out through your skin with constant delicate blood flow is very, very sensitive and it hurts a lot. So when your bird has these pin feathers that are newly developed and are still pretty small, your birds are going to be very agitated, they're going to be very itchy, and they're not going to want you to touch there. They might want you to scratch it because it hurts and they want you to alleviate some of that pain and that discomfort. But as soon as you touch it, most of the time, if you flick it the wrong way, the bird is going to yelp and they're going to turn and they're going to nip your finger because it hurts. It's a really sensitive area. The other thing worth noting is that the amount of blood going to this feather in order to produce it is very, very large. There's so much blood rushing to this area trying to develop this feather that if that feather were to break, there is an open bloodstream just coming out. and that is a very powerful stream that can have a lot of blood loss very quickly if it's not stopped. And that's where blood feathers can end up being extremely dangerous. Most of the time this isn't a problem. All the feathers that grow on a bird's body don't usually get enough impact where they're going to break during development. If you have a bird that has been clipped, however, and they're starting to grow back the ones on their wing, you may notice that they break those feathers pretty frequently because they don't have the feathers surrounding them there in order to stabilize the feather while it's growing and reduce the impact it has from hitting walls or running into other obstacles. And this is even scarier because the feathers on the wings are very, very thick. They require so much blood. The sheath is massive. You can imagine how much blood is going to come rushing out of that thing when it does break open. And that is very, very dangerous. Not only do those feathers have a significant amount of blood flow running through them, but they are also super exposed to hazards that could cause them to break in the first place. And that's where you can start to run into problems, because these feathers push out so much blood so fast and they have a lot of difficulty clotting on their own. So if your bird is clipped their wing on something, or maybe they've preened their chest too hard and they have opened up a blood feather and they've broken open that stream, you need to act very quickly in order to stop that blood flow. In some cases, you can get away with just using a little bit of quick stop, putting it on the wound, and it will clot and you'll be fine. The body will realize that the feather is damaged and it will just push it out and try again. However, that isn't always the case. When it comes to feathers that are a lot more prone to getting hit and damaged, like the ones on the tail or the ones on the wing, sometimes clotting it doesn't do the job, because every time that you clot it, the bird flaps, the clot comes off, and it starts bleeding again. And now you're in a dangerous situation where your bird's wound won't stay clotted and they're constantly losing blood and you have no idea how long they've been losing blood for. Birds are super, super sensitive, they're super, super small. It doesn't take a lot of blood loss for them to go unconscious and suffer a lot of damage. So the more blood they're losing, the riskier things are going to get. When it comes down to these sorts of situations where you've tried clotting it and it just won't stick and your bird is still losing blood, you have to remove the feather. Now, as I've said, this doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, if they break a chest feather, they're not going to be ramming their chest into things, causing that wound to reopen. So you can just clot it and move on with your life and it'll be fine. Just keep an eye on it, check on it, make sure it's not getting infected. However, when it comes down to these larger, more exposed feathers like the ones on the wing, a lot of the time they keep reopening the wound and that becomes dangerous and you're going to have to remove it. Now, when you remove a feather, it is going to hurt. There is no easy way around it. It's very sensitive, it's very sore, but the pain of pulling out the feather is not as severe as the death that can occur from losing too much blood. In order to remove a feather, you're just going to hold the bird very, very still, take a pair of pliers, you're going to go extremely close to the base of the feather, right where it connects to the skin, and you're not going to jerk it out because you don't want it to snap, but you're basically going to have a very firm grip and just quickly and steadily pull it out in one fell swoop. You don't want to jerk it because you don't want to damage the follicle, you don't want to damage the feather, you want it to come out nice and smoothly. If you rip it, you can damage the follicle and the feather may not grow back. Most of the time, this is something you can get your veterinarian to do. Doing it isn't fun. I've had to do it once or twice myself. It's really scary, it's not pleasant, you know that you're hurting your bird, you know that it's not the greatest thing in the world, but it's the only thing you can do to stop the bleeding at that time, so it's the only option you really have left. That's when it comes down to pulling these feathers out. Ideally, you're going to take your bird to the vet, but if their blood loss is happening so quickly and it's just not staying clotted, sometimes you do have to do it yourself. And that is something you have to be prepared for when it comes to taking care of birds, because if you can't do that, and you aren't prepared at that point in time to do the first aid necessary to handle the situation, then the bird may not survive. Now, if you can have it where the blood will clot long enough for you to be able to get to your veterinarian and have them pull it out, that is the ideal situation. If you can get them to the vet can put a little bit of numbness on the area so it's not going to hurt as much, and they will have the knowledge and skills and experience there to be able to pull it out properly where it's not going to damage the follicle and your bird's going to get the proper treatment that they need. But it is something to be aware of, that if an accident ever occurs and you can't get them to the vet in time or the blood just won't stop, it is important to know what to do so that way you can handle the situation on your own and not end up accidentally losing your bird because of it. So I hope that clarified what blood feathers were, and I know it's going to be scary to hear all the things that can happen to them, but understanding that blood feathers are constantly a part of your bird's development, they aren't something that is always going to be a problem, and seeing one on your bird doesn't mean you need to rip it out. It's only the act of when it breaks open and cannot reclot. That is the only time in which you need to worry about whether or not you need to get them to a vet or you have to pull it out yourself. Blood feathers are going going to be a constant part of your bird's life. That's how they grow their feathers. They're always going to be there. There is no getting rid of them one way or the other. So I hope that kind of clarified what a blood feather was, and that you don't inherently need to be scared of it just by seeing one on your bird. It's just when they break open that they become a problem. So I hope that clarified everything for you guys. I apologize that it was not clear enough a few years ago when I made that first video. Hopefully this cleared everything up a little bit and now you have a bit of a better understanding of what those feathers are. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!